Hi, my name's Sonia and this is my channel, See It Then, See It Now. Today's video is the first in a brand new series that I'm bringing to the channel called the Junk Drawer Project. When I created the Halloween project, I was challenged with only using items from my stash, and that's inspired me to continue using those items. So basically, periodically I'm going to take an item from my stash, which comprises of items I've bought from the charity shop, items I've been given, recycling, bottles, jars, all that kind of thing. I'm going to take something from the stash and turn it into something beautiful. This is going to be slotted in between the other stuff, so I'm still going to be doing furniture makeovers, room makeovers and all the kind of stuff that I've already been doing on my channel. These are just going to be slotted in between. And this is the first one. I can't wait to share this with you. It turned out amazing. Let's take a look.
I needed to cut some pieces of card, but you guys don't need to watch me do that. These are for the roof, and I decided to go with a very rustic thrown together look, so the odd uneven shapes are perfect. I bent the pieces to curve around the sides of the jar lid and then covered them with a layer of filler. I used this clay tool, I think it's called a 7-prong sculpture needle, and I used it to press some grain and lines into the filler just to make it look like rustic wood. The card didn't really want to stay bent, and I had to prop up the ends just while it dried, otherwise it just slowly straightened itself back out again. Once it was dry, I gave it 2 coats of raw Umber acrylic paint. While the pieces were drying, I moved on to the house. I cut out a paper template for the door and I marked on the jar where I wanted it to go. The jar had a few imperfections, so I picked the nicest part for the window and then placed the door just off to the side of that area. I used air dry clay to make the door. I started by rolling it out. I then cut around the paper template. I scored some lines in just to make it look like planks of wood, and then I used the same prong tool to make the wood grain. Once I was happy with it, I glued it to the jar using wood glue. Next I made some tiny stone shapes from the clay to go around the door as the surround. The clay kept sliding down the jar though once I was trying to glue it, so I had to use some masking tape at each side just to hold it in place until it dried. Back to the roof, and the lid of this jar is a screw lid, so first of all I marked off where the front of the roof was going to be, and then I measured how far down I wanted the pieces to sit. Then I hot glued them all into place. I went over it all with another coat of the raw umber, making sure to get underneath and inside the jar lid. I twisted a couple of strands of jute together to make a rope and wrapped it around the top edge. It really added to that rustic look. I was loving how this was coming together. We're on next day now, and the door was dry, and thankfully it hadn't slid down the jar overnight, which I did run and check first thing. As soon as I woke up I was like, oh, my door, let's go and check. Not that I'd have been able to do anything if it had, but luckily it had all stayed in place and all was dry and good. So now I was onto the window. I used some more air dried clay to shape out the window surround and the crossbars, and I glued these all in place. I did try some Gorilla Glue this time just to see if it held the clay a little bit better than the wood glue. It was slightly better, but it did still want to slide a little bit. For the base, I used an old plate, another stash find, so a junk drawer bonus here. I glued the four wooden beads to the top of the plate, which will become the underneath side. I wanted to raise it up so to make it easier to pick it up. Have you ever tried to lift an upside down plate without sliding it? It's not easy, and this one's going to have a Gonk house on top of it, so raising it up seemed like a good call. I know I'm flitting about a lot with this project. One minute I'm on the house, then I'm on the plate, then I'm on the roof, then I'm back on the house. It's because I was constantly waiting for stuff to dry, so it is a little bit bitty, so you do need to bear with me. So while I was waiting on the window drying, waiting for the beads to dry, I decided to make a little window box. I cut and taped together some pieces of cardboard and shaped them in so that they would fit around the window. I covered them with the filler that I've used on the roof, and I used the little prong tool again to make the wood grain effect. And then of course I had to wait for it to dry, and then once it was dry I painted it with the raw Umber paint like I did with the roof. Now to create a footpath to go down the plate. Now because the jar had that lip at the bottom, I had to sit the door quite high up, so I needed to make some steps from clay that would lead all the way down the front of the plate. And of course we're going for rustic, so they don't need to be uniform, they don't need to be perfect, so they're all a bit misshapen, they're different heights, but I just played about with the clay basically. I had fun playing with the clay, making each of the steps and moulding them round until I had my little footpath going all the way down to the front edge of the plate. The area to the right of the steps became a flower bed. I covered it in PVA and then sprinkled on some Epsom salts to look like soil. I then started gluing tiny stones around the edge of the plate. I've done this before using PVA and they usually hold absolutely fine, but I did have a little challenge with gravity this time. Obviously the plate was sloped, so the stones wanted to slide off. I built it up in layers, so what slid off, what stuck, and then I'd just go back and build it up with some more later. I do actually build these stones up around the plate as the project progresses. So at the moment I'm just doing this area here. Later on you'll see that it starts building up and more of these little stones start appearing. I basically use them to cover the outer edge of the plate. Now to fill my little flower box. I snipped a tiny piece of old Christmas tree branch. If you've seen my other festive projects, you'll know I've been reusing a broken tree for over a year now. I added this to the bottom just to fill the box and give it some greenery. I then added a few fake leaves and some tiny little clay roses that I'd painted red and gold. And this turned out to be so cute. I absolutely love it. I think it just looks adorable. Back to the plate again, and I painted the soil with raw umber and black acrylic paint. I then gave the flower bed a neat little edge with some white stones which I glued in place with the Gorilla Glue. Neutral grey and white acrylic paint put some colour in the steps. Now this is where I made a mistake. I painted the jar with white chalk paint everywhere except for the window. And then afterwards I realised I was that caught up in what the outside was going to look like. I didn't give any thought as to what the inside of the jar would look like when you look through the window. And it just looked plain white, which wasn't good. If I was to do this again, I think I would have decoupaged the outside of the jar first with the pattern facing inwards and then painted over the top of that. But as it was, I had the fun job of decoupaging the inside walls instead, which was a bit fiddly and will go down as not my best decoupage work, but it looks fine through the window and it was doable. It just would have been so much better to have decoupaged and then painted over the top of the decoupage. Once the white was dry, I gave it 2 coats of this custom mix of white and buff titanium acrylic paint, and I mixed in a bit of baking soda just to add a little bit of texture. This is the same grey that I used on the steps. And here's me decoupaging the inside of the jar. Like I said, it was very fiddly. Now for some really fun bits. I glued on the little plants and flowers for the little flower bed. And I added my 2 gonks. They finally have a home. Well, a garden and steps, but the home is coming. I used the raw Umber acrylic paint again to paint the door and the crossbars of the window. I decided to make a tiny little lantern to go on the side of the house, so I started off by bending a piece of wire into shape. I then cut a tiny square out of the air dry clay to act as the base, and then I added air dry clay to the top of the lantern to create the top piece. I then decided to make a teeny tiny candle to go inside, so I just rolled a tiny piece of clay and then I made a tiny little flame which I painted yellow, and I stuck a piece of wire through the flame and then stuck it through the candle. Once the clay on the lantern was dry, I painted the lantern black, and once that was dry, I decided to add a piece of clay to the piece of wire at the back just to give me a bigger surface area for gluing it to the house. So I added this piece of clay, which I painted black as well, and I glued that into the wire at the back. To create the door handle, I used a tiny piece of clay and I moulded it to shape, and then I pushed, like, I don't know what they call them, like a jewellery ring. It was like if you want to make a necklace, you would use one of these little rings. I have them in my stash. I was given some jewellery making things years ago, so I just grabbed one of those and I pushed the clay in at one side, and then I just painted the whole thing black. My tiny candle got glued in place, and this little lantern is just so cute. This is really starting to come together now, and now I need to add all these little finishing touches. I glued on the door handle, and then I glued on this little wreath that I'd made for the front door. I didn't actually get the footage of this, but basically this is a little piece of that Christmas tree branch. I cut all the length off the greenery, made it really short, moulded it into a circle, and then I just added a little bit of ribbon at the top for a bow, and added a couple of little tiny beads to act as baubles. So that got glued onto the door. I glued on the flower box and then attached the lantern. Now it was finally time to put this house in place. I added a small Christmas tree just next to the Gonk that's got the string of lights in his hands because he's just about to decorate that tree. I added some tiny pine cones and twigs to the roof just because I thought they'd look cute and add a bit more of a rustic look to the roof. And finally, snow. I brushed some PVA over parts of the roof and sprinkled some Epsom salts on. I did think about putting some snow on the ground as well, but because the stones around the side were white, I didn't feel like it was showing and I felt like it was going to be a bit lost. So they've had some snow and it's all nearly all gone. There's just that little bit that's always left on the roof lid that's just not quite thawed out yet.
So let's have a reminder and see it then. And let's see it now. How cute did this turn out? I absolutely love it and it was so inexpensive to make, but what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments and hit that like button. Make sure that you are subscribed because I've got lots more Christmas stuff coming. There's updates on the guest bedroom, I've got the project for the Georgian Dragon coming. There's lots coming, so do make sure that you are subscribed. You can also follow me on Facebook where I post extra updates, sneak peeks and just extra bits really as to what's going on, so do make sure that you're following me there too. All that's left for me to say is thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate you all and I will see you very soon in the next one. Bye for now.